Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Nicola Solomon, the Chief Executive of the Society of Authors, and thanks for joining the second in our Autumn Afternoon Tea series. All our sessions are free, as you know, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Contingency Fund to help support authors in financial difficulty, we would be really grateful, and particularly because, as you'll hear later, Daljit has been really helping us by being one of the assessors of that fund. And that's not the only reason. We're very lucky to have you with us. So today's format, quick intro from me, and then Daljit and I are going to chat for about 30 minutes and then have about 15 minutes of audience questions. And if you want to submit questions in the meantime, just type them in the chat and we'll get to them if we can. So an introduction of Daljit. His 4 poetry collections, all with Faber Faber, have won the Forward Prize for Best Individual Poem and Best First Book, the South Bank Show Decibel Award and the Cholmondeley Award, and have been shortlisted for the Costa Prize and twice for the TS Eliot Prize. Daljit is a PBS New Generation Poet, and his poems appear in the New Yorker, the LRB and the TLS, and his journalism in the FT and the Guardian. He's the inaugural poet in residence for Radio 4 and 4 Extra. He presents the weekly Poetry Extra, and he serves on the Council of the Royal Society of Literature and teaches at Brunel University. And as I said, he's also one of the assessors of our emergency fund. There's some of his books behind me we might hopefully talk about a bit more later. But Daljit, can you start by giving us a short tour of your workspace and your creative routine? And I don't know if the workspace is going to include the puppy. Daljit and I have learned just in this moment that we've both got a brand new puppy this week, but you're only going to see Daljit.
Right, I was going to show you some of my slips of things first before we move over. I've got loads of these slips of paper where I often write down ideas or lines. I just seem to accumulate them, and then every now and then I'll type them in. And I have loads of those sort of packs of paper where I'll be typing in poems and editing loads of that. I'm sure everyone does that. And one of the things I've been doing quite a lot is typing up that eventually when I write up the poem, I'll kind of edit in black. And then once I've typed in the changes in black, I go back to this sort of pink or red pen. That's my next layer. So I don't keep printing off stuff. That's kind of a real waste of paper, isn't it? So I've got, like, you know, so here I've got loads of...
Wow.
Started off in black, type those changes up, then I thought, oh, they're not good enough. And then I know that the red is the next colour.
Amazing.
So I might then go on to green or blue after this. If I can't be bothered to type them up, because typing up so boring. So if I can also keep it physical with the pen, it's much more exciting.
And there's something very different about it being physical, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a weird thing, isn't it? It's hard to explain. I know people talk about muscle memory, but then some people say there's no such thing as muscle memory. I know Alan Rusbridger's book on the piano piece he learned. One of the findings he had to scientists was there is no muscle memory. So you can't actually get the piano piece. You remember he's trying to learn the Rachmaninoff 9?
Yes.
The toughest. But he found that, just because you practice loads, it won't go into your memory. It wasn't disappointing.
So, and
it's a pleasure, isn't it? It's a pleasure. We can talk about pleasure of writing.
Yes, and it is. I think it's really interesting in that sense. And one of the questions I'm going to ask it now, someone's Catherine Black said, it's interesting that you edit in hard copy, but do you ever edit on screen? And is there method to the colours you use? It made me think that being a lawyer, there was always a very set way of colours in which you did amendments to documents. In the old days we did that. So they started with red, red lining, whatever, and then they went on to green, and then through purple and blue. So do you have a series of ways in which you do it? Do you always use the same series of colours in order?
No, I wish I should do. I should have a system like that. It's just whatever pen I can find. So I've got daughters of 10 and 12, and things go missing all the time. They end up in their pencil case. So whatever colour I can find, and I'll try and remember this is my latest colour up from the one before. But yeah, I really don't like editing on screen, because especially since lockdown, I'm already spending too much time on the screen with Zoom meetings or whatever. So I'm trying to spend as little time editing on the computer. So print off and then spend as much time just editing on paper as possible. And if anything, since lockdown, I've been doing that much more, just writing again. So it's got me writing much more again, as opposed to sitting on a laptop. And typically, I still do this if I get time, is write in a cafe. That I would say that's probably my best office for writing poems. quite a dingy. I like dingy cafes, which are quite ugly. Right? And then, because I then just focus, there's nothing really to look at. I quite like those sort of low ceiling, kind of ugly cafes where they leave me alone. I'll probably drink loads of coffee. I'll keep buying coffee every half hour or so, and a sandwich here and there. But so I like those cafes in particular. I tend to write listening to music a lot as well, especially editing. Sort of like, you know, well, at the moment I'm listening to Kate Bush's The Kick Inside, her first album.
Oh, wow.
I've been doing that for a couple of months now. My wife are sick of it because we hear it every now and then. But I just put it on my headphones. And I think it's that repetition of lively music and something you know well.
Yeah.
Background.
It's the same thing again. So you wouldn't, yes. So that's,
yeah, it's the same thing again. And I think partly because when you're writing poems, I think of it as in music in time. You're writing in time. So I can usually hear a type of rhythm going. Sometimes it's a mixture of one non-stress, two non-stresses, or whatever it is. But get that kind of fluency going.
It gets the rhythm in. That's amazing. And you've already mentioned your wife and your daughters. So where are you geographically? You don't have to give out your address or anything, but who are you living with? Who have you been with during lockdown? And then it would be good if you give us a quick tour.
So I live in Harrow, it's northwest London, on the plains. We're not on the hill. That's a bit too exclusive for us. Just on the plains. We've got a park near us. That's good. So at home with my wife, Catherine, who's an educational psychologist, and obviously, you know, with the pandemic, she can't go to school to make her visits. She can go to one school per week, and then another school the following week. But she's got quite a lot of schools where she gets referrals from, so this is a bad time. Yes. You know, there's really needy kids, and she can't have access to them. And I've got a daughter from my first marriage. She doesn't live too far away. She's 25, and Maya is 12, and Hannah's 10. So one's in year 8 and one's year 6. So one's in final year of primary school. So they'll usually get home about 3:30-ish, 3:15. And then we've got a puppy and 2 gerbils. So we've got 2 gerbils in January. Sorry, guinea pigs. I can't remember what they are. Guinea pigs.
Oh, no, we're beating you. We've got 8 guinea pigs with 3 babies. I don't know why my noise is just nothing. We've got 8 guinea pigs, 3 guinea pig babies, plus the puppy. So and an older dog. So we're doing worse than you. Show me a tour of your space.
Since we got the puppy, the girls don't seem as interested in the guinea pigs. It's hard, isn't it? So I feel really bad for the guinea pigs. So they just have to clear the poo out every day, things like that. So I'm in the living room. So I'm going to go next door where I tend to generally work, which is into the kitchen area. I don't know if that's clear. So a bit weird, but I don't know why there's a torch there. But I normally stand on the step. I don't know if you can see.
Oh, yes.
Can you see the step? So rather than just sit down, I quite like standing up here.
Wow.
So stand there. So I can stand like this.
We've lost Daljit for a minute, so hopefully he'll come back in a moment. And I hope everyone saw a little glimpse of his puppy there. Daljit, we've lost you for a moment.
Hello.
Hi, probably lost you because of the Wi-Fi. Probably best, yes, you're back.
Yeah. Now. Oh, sorry.
But we could get into the puppy and the space, so that was brilliant. And someone's also asked, quite rightly, because you said you like dingy views, but that looked rather nice. But would a nice view put you off writing?
Probably not, but I quite like that discipline, retreating into yourself, withdrawing from luxury and pleasure, because there's so much wealth inside, in the imagination. Quite like to let that sort of take over.
And are there any essential rituals that you have for doing that, for going inside?
I always use Bic pen. I cannot stress that enough, the importance of a Bic pen. Good old I can't say the word. The Marxist Bic pen, or the working class Bic pen, not so much Marxist. But I like the flow of the pen, and I'm always losing them, so I've got tons of them. I've got a box of them. And I just really enjoy the experience of writing with a Bic pen. So I can't really write with another pen. I've tried fancy pens in the past, other types of pen. I just don't enjoy the experience of writing. So much of writing poetry is about the physical act, I think, because it's such a short distance, isn't it? The pleasure is constantly rewriting. And often with a first draft, I'll rewrite write it by hand again, the second draft, and keep rewriting the whole poem out by hand quite often, especially if it's like 30, 40 line poem.
Wow. So it won't get typed until it's really sort of almost in a final iteration.
It's getting there, yeah. Just because that sensation's really pleasurable. It's simple as that. And maybe something comes from that, just that might be missed with the typewriter or laptop. Just that act of keyboarding doesn't feel enjoyable. And I think that's really important that every act of the writing of the poem should be fun. And often, if anything about the poem isn't fun, I need to get rid of that verse or that line, or abandon the poem if it's not feeling fun. If it feels like work, even for a minute, that's really bad.
That's really amazing, because your poems, quite a few of them are very thought through. They're very elusive. There's a lot of allusions to other things, and they're really clearly very carefully crafted. And you've only got the 4 collections, so it's not like you're working very fast. So I really like the idea that it doesn't feel like hard work, that it's fun all the way through somehow.
Yeah, I'm always abandoning poems because of that. I tend to sift out. So you get better over time at deciding what needs to be written. You're always sifting, processing in your brain. Should I write this poem or shouldn't I? And that's really important, to not waste too much energy. And then even then, there's so many I write. After a while, I just don't go back to it and think, no, it's not calling me. I'm going to abandon it. And I'm going to tell you something really quite embarrassing, I guess. I remember seeing an interview with Morrissey and George Michael in the 90s, and I was writing lyrics then. I remember George Michael saying his trick for writing his lyrics was never to write it there and then, but to leave it for a day or two, because if it stayed in his brain, that meant it was memorable. And so that's been one of the most influential things of my writing. That's a really good thing, because every poet love to be remembered. They're in love with memory and time. So quite often I'll try and leave it for at least a day, sleep on it. If it's still there, that means it's probably memorable. It might have an impact on the reader, maybe.
That's really, really, really fascinating. And do you ever go back to these poems? You've abandoned them, or once they're abandoned, have you decided they're rubbish and they're gone?
Yeah, only if it calls back to me. I've had one or two, like 5, 6 years later, and I've gone back to it. Suddenly woken up one day and I can hear it calling me. And the problem with the poem's been solved. And it's probably you need to mature a bit or try out different techniques, and then you come to it. And your brain's processed it, isn't it? Sort of sitting there, sifting things out and processing. So I don't think you ever really abandon poems. I don't know stuff I've abandoned, whether it'll come back in 10 years' time or whenever.
Because there is quite a progression through your work, from your first collection, which might be a look we have coming to Dover, and up to the latest. They do feel different. And also, you say you like to be funny, but some of your poems are quite angry.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed using a range of emotions. The anger is a legitimate emotion for people who feel they've not been understood, or for people who haven't processed things properly. That, to me, is a legitimate emotion that should be dramatised. So I just don't think writers should just have a kind of carefully codified, calm, reflective voice, because we have a whole range of emotion. And I'll try and bring in sarcasm if I can, and just anger as well as calmness. In a collection, I'm really keen to get a whole range, much of a range, partly for the pleasure for the reader. So you're getting, this kind of voice, then this kind of voice, and this voice. And sometimes in the same poem, if you can achieve it, it's great, isn't it? Because we live those lives, don't we? Sometimes we get angry. We know we're just acting it out. We're not going to do anything with it. But it's an emotion we have.
That is amazing. And you've written, you do write in a number of voices, and particularly giving that voice and twisting the language to use the whole Sikh Punjabi voices coming in, but particularly experience of being here. I think it's very original and very interesting to see. You're not one person saying these things. There's a whole range of them. It's lovely to write.
Yeah, that's part of the pleasure, isn't it, of writing? Allowing your brain to access different personalities, like a novelist maybe, or a playwright. They do that. Why can't poets have different voices and different characters?
Yes, because there really are characters in your verse. That's really amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
And do you have a particular time that you write, and has your routine changed because of the whole lockdown thing? You clearly, for a while, couldn't go into those cafes. So.
Yeah, when I first started, I went down to 4 days a week as a teacher. So I used to have one day, and I would just usually go off to a cafe and write, sit there for hours on end. But obviously now, much later on, fourth book and loads of responsibilities, I find I have to squeeze it in wherever, which I actually don't mind with poetry. When I was writing the version of the Ramayana, the Indian epic, I took a year out from school as a teacher then, because you can't really do that otherwise. I had to read, hundreds of books, as it were, researching loads of documents. I need to go to the British Library every day. But now I quite enjoy that liberated feeling, just writing as and when. And the key thing for me is, and really important for me, like with the Bic pen, or same with Bic pen, is to keep it feeling like a hobby and not like a job. So I keep reminding myself I'd never have to publish another book again if I'm not happy with it. And I just write as freely and keep that first pleasure of writing there when you first start writing. And so when I first wrote, I didn't expect to get published. I didn't think about getting published, actually. It wasn't for me. I didn't think it was people.
And I read that you never read a poetry collection until you were 19, or you were really quite old to come to poetry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, just I don't remember really studying it at school. It was quite a tough school, and then we did CSEs instead of O levels. And then I went eventually I did evening classes. I went to university at 21. And it was really, I came across William Blake's songs and sonnets in a bookshop. We lived in Sheffield then. And it was just, I was writing song lyrics, but I didn't want to be in a band. And just those poems, Songs of Innocent Experience, I just picked that book, and it just changed my life from that day on. And,
and interesting that they're called songs, and you were writing song lyrics, and you must have suddenly realised that your work was poetry and not, all of those don't necessarily have to be such different things.
Yeah, I also realised how rubbish my songs were compared to Blake. How you can use that simple language for such complexity, which suited the times, or the style he was writing in, using the children's voices, all that sort of nursery rhyme. Yeah.
It's fair to say you do a bit about that too. And just about a slightly different question, moving on, but in terms of how your work goes into the world, do you do a lot of performance of it, or is it mostly read page poetry?
When I first started out, I used to do readings for Spread the Word and one or two other arts organisations, and they kind of very keen for me to go down the performancey route, which I didn't really fancy. But I learned how to dramatise my poems, especially the speakers, the way as a male or female speaker. So I would work on how to pause, raise the voice, drop the voice, and not see it as a line on the page, but just see it as a kind of text, a voice speaking, so the reader could pick up these kind of periods of thought that I would deliver, and sort of just move the body around a little bit as needed. And to some degree, I still do that with certain poems, I think, that need slightly more dramatisation. And anyway, all poems want to be read out, don't they?
Definitely. And actually, is that one of the reasons why you work standing up, that it's a kind of whole body experience?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a really physical. It should be a really physical, like you put a boiler suit on type of thing. And I do find that. I don't know if your listeners find that. If I'm ever feeling unwell, I find it really hard to write, because there's all that kind of neuroscience about how if the thing you're reading, you experience it in your brain. Your brain gets stimulated in the same way. So if you imagine reading about driving a car, that part of the brain gets stimulated, and so on. So when you're writing, and you're breathing the physicality of the poem, and you're really living the emotions, and you're trying to find the right words, there's a whole series of events that are taking place at once. So you have to be physically fit. And so standing up, moving around feels the right way to me often, even if it's a quite contemplative poem, because it's reminding you the physicality of the experience.
That's so interesting. And where else do I like, and I hate asking people this question because it sounds like that where do you get your ideas from, that sort of noise asks you, but what are your inspirations? You have quite a range of things you write about, some much more big and public in a way, particularly in your latest collection, British Museum, which is up here, but also all through your work you have a real interest in the public and the public experience, but also the very private, your baby's bottom and nappies and so on. So are there particular things that inspire you? Where do those poems?
Yeah, I feel like it. I feel that I like writers, poets who have a kind of quite a narrow project. They're thinking through things over and over again, and alongside, like I love sort of Seamus Heaney, that kind of poetry. Derek Walcott, those sort of poets who just got this kind of vision, and then so I work on that quite hard, thinking about multicultural society. And how we get on as people from different backgrounds. And then alongside that, the occasional poem will come, which is probably like the private poem about family and stuff. And if it fits in with the kind of themes, then I'll put it into a collection if it can work. But generally, I tend to read a lot. I think I read a lot around those sort of issues about multiculturalism, us as a community, as a nation state, also how we relate to other people on the planet. I tend to read a lot of books to get my unconscious going, I think. Yeah? So I'll end up dreaming about some weird things, hopefully. Or thinking
you're reading a lot of non-fiction and kind of current affairs.
Yeah, I do tend to read quite a lot of non-fiction. I just read tons of poetry books anyway, because it's still... And since I've been working at university now 4 years, I'll probably read even more poetry books, because I'm trying to I'm teaching poetry there, and trying to teach the latest poetry wherever possible, which has been really exciting for me. It's made me think about, well, what is the latest poetry all the time, and what is innovative poetry? So I think that's been really useful working at university.
I was going to ask that question about what poetry means to you, particularly in light of the recent attempt to make poetry one of the options on the curriculum rather than making it compulsory, at a time where I think many of us thought that poetry was more important than ever. So and as you said, you hadn't really come to poetry until you were 19. So what do you feel about the importance of poetry and children and so on?
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes my heart sink is the over-analysis of poems at school, because the natural experience for me is when I read a book of poems, I'll read for fun, and if there's a poem I like, I might go back to it, and then at some point I might sort of look at some of the techniques. But what usually happens in a typical classroom, I remember being an English teacher, you've got a 35-minute lesson, you're going to look at a poem and analyse it. So you read it once to the students, right, quick second read, now let's start breaking it down. And it's, we talked about puppies, you've got a puppy, I've got a puppy. What if we started analysing it? And what's the organs, how long will it live? We don't do that to things. Why do we do that over-analysis, to poems? So we end up kind of killing them a bit. So I want kids to read poems for fun and, enjoy it and talk about their personal response to it. You can still do a rational personal response, like, what certain things mean to you, rather than try and have this total breakdown of the poem and make everything mathematically link up. Because there's enough logical training in other subjects. You don't have to do it in English or with poetry as well.
Yes.
It's such a peculiar thing, isn't it, poetry?
You're completely right. And the puppy analogy is a really good one, because if someone said to you, why are you enjoying, what are you enjoying about that puppy? Why do you like the puppy? You can't really do that, can you?
Yeah, but we wouldn't start analysing, the type of fur, the biology of it, all that stuff.
No, definitely not. So, and I'm just going to move on a bit more wide. One of the questions I was going to ask is, I don't know, has any of your work been translated? Because that involves other people breaking down your work, and I wondered how you work with translators, or what your feeling is about other people engaging with your work in that way, or analysing it, or translating it, or reading it. How does that feel to you?
Yeah, I've had people translate my work over the years, and they've been in touch. I remember working with a Dutch poet about 10 years ago, and we spent he's funded to translate some of my poems. We spent the whole day just going through one poem that we have coming over. And because I've got so many, the English language has so many possible meanings, double and treble meanings. And I was trying to explain some of these other possibilities that the poem might have, or the words have. And he was saying it's going to be impossible to get that into Dutch because the language doesn't function, the semantics of the language. So that was so I can see my poems probably won't work so well for translation because of the tonal shifts. I think I'm trying to sometimes be serious, funny, and also just the language itself is so rich, isn't it, English language? And if you're using a very simple palette, standard English, fine. But I'm trying to use Old English, contemporary English. Oh, am I still here?
You're still here. We can only see you for a bit, but probably your face will come back in a moment. So if everyone ignores it, we're still loving to hear you speak. And I think you're right. There are so many accents and voices in your poetry. That would be really, really hard to translate, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I can't see it really working. People have done translations. I remember speaking to a Russian poet who'd done some translation, a Danish poet. And one of the other things I was saying is, well, we don't, in our tradition, we don't have the kind of foreign language voices so much. So I was trying to do these Indian voices into English. And they were saying both the Dutch guy as well, actually, and the Danish guy were saying it would just come across a bit weird because they don't have those poets doing that in their countries, where you have, somebody from migrant background doing voices of their own background. Because, I guess the English language and the empire history lends itself to these things with great.
Absolutely, because there's such a range of accents and such a range of different ways of speaking. One of the questions being asked by Sue O'Connell is, do you actually speak more than one language? And if so, does that lead you to an appreciation of the words in both languages?
Yeah, so I guess my first language was Punjabi, from Indian Punjabi, not Pakistan. They're very similar anyway. So my parents came over late 50s. My mum never went to school, didn't have a day of education. So at home, we spoke Punjabi. And we were always expected to speak Punjabi, not English. So my brother and myself, there's two of us, he's 2 years older. So we both remember those times when we didn't speak English at all. Remember watching cartoons and pretending to speak English and trying out, mock voices. So I would have learnt it when I went to school. So yeah, and because of that, I think it's really important for me to try and imbue my English with a feeling of Punjabi. So I'm always looking for those words in the palette, especially those sort of plosive p, b, m sounds. They're really, in Punjabi, full of them. And the big open vowel sounds that Punjabi has, where you almost open your mouth much more than, say, English. A lot of English speaking does. Sort of, often in poetry, you get those kind of restricted vowels.
Yeah.
Understated, reflective. So mine will naturally sound louder than other people's poetry because my head feels split when I'm writing. I can hear the Indian and the English at the same time. I try and find ways to use the two, I think.
That's really, really, really fascinating. I'm going to go ask you a bit more widely questions now. One of them that we've been thinking about was about the poetry library, which you said you go to a lot, and of course they've had to close physically, but we were asked to remind everybody is still open digitally. And just to talk about what that means to you, that kind of welcome something like the poetry library.
But I mean, poetry library is a kind of rites of passage, I think. Any poet who first starts out needs to go to the poetry library. I remember getting my first session was a free with a poet was with Ruth Padell through Time Out. There's an advert, you can have a free session with a poet, half hour. And, I didn't know my poetry was any good or not. She recommended, you could go to workshops, blah, 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 do these things. But also she recommended I should go to the poetry library in the Central Bank and get books from there. And that was amazing for me. I didn't know there was a poetry library, and they have at least last 100 years worth of books. And they used to have a section there where they have loads of essays or newspaper articles and reviews by the poets. So this was before the age of the internet, the late 90s, I guess, I'm thinking of. So I'd get all that stuff there, and I'd just take poetry books out. And that was really important to browse and see, because it's really hard to know what to get. What should you be reading? So I discovered so many poets for the first time just by going there. And they're really nice people in there. They're poets, aren't they, in there? They work behind the counter. And I used to love, in fact, quite often I used to take the books back late. It's very naughty. And they never find you. And they almost apologise to you for bringing the book back late. It's so lovely.
It's lovely. And also, because poetry books are quite expensive, and only reading just one poem in a collection or an anthology doesn't give a sense. Your books particularly, you can see that they might not be linked in a kind of narrative way, but there's a link of thought in each collection, and they put together quite carefully, and you lose that if one's taken out. So being able to have a book, even if you only read one poem, is great.
Yeah, and they had the poetry magazines. So I didn't have a lot of money back in those days, so I wouldn't have been able to buy as many poetry books. And so I used to read the magazines there as well. And they had information about the latest competitions, magazines, new magazines, and where you can get your poems published, and all sorts of information there. So it's still. By the way, I still use the library. So obviously went before lockdown. I think I returned some books for lockdown. So it's a place I still go to.
Oh, they're definitely saying, please, can we do it? Please, you can go online. You can. I'm not sure about borrowing, but you can go online.
Yeah, I didn't do that. Can you tell us about it? So you can get stuff online now.
Definitely, if you look at them online, there are things you can do, and there is definitely openings online. I'm not sure if you can borrow books. Go and look, everyone.
You can borrow ebooks, can't you? Generally, but I assume you can do that now still.
We should all be supporting it, because then Then I know that they can. We can put some work into hopefully it reopens as soon as possible. And that takes us, I suppose, into the crisis generally. You've been working as an assessor for the contingency fund, for which we're exceptionally grateful. I rang you out of the blue and asked if you would do it. And I suppose my question is, what have you learned from that, and what do we think is the way out of this for writers?
Well, the second one's a hard one, isn't it? The first one, what can we? I mean, the experience of that has been quite humbling. Seeing how the hardship of people is quite alarming. The fact, as you know, in the forms, and people might not be aware, people put down how much they're earning from the writing and how much they're earning in general. And so many people are trying to make a living as a writer, which is so admirable. They're trying, it's a crusade, isn't it? And I wouldn't want to dissuade anyone from doing that. But obviously with lockdown, you can't do readings. People are earning absolutely nothing. So we're talking about, journalists, who write about sports. There's no sports, there's no music gigs going on. They can't write about music. Poets who had books out and readings, they haven't got any readings. Novelists, screenwriters, playwrights. It's just been a complete death, isn't there? I mean, for me, way out, I would want someone like Rishi Sunak to say, yeah, I know we're funding people who make money from money, but we should also equally fund people who make money in the arts or who struggle to make money. I mean, it's really the case. It doesn't seem to hit politicians, the wealth that a nation has in its writers and what the writers do for that country as soft power around the world, also individually. We reread, and the mental well-being of the act of reading. We know book sales have gone up, but that obviously doesn't reflect in profits for writers. It reflects in profit for Amazon. Yeah, but not for authors. So we do need a massive government intervention. Firstly, just respect for the authors, for writing community, and in a sense, I guess, in the more brutal sense, there will be a self-sifting where people realise, actually, I'm not making a living out of this from writing, and maybe I need to move on. And but again, that's complicated, because the tragedy of that is some great, amazing writers who are going to be great writers are never going to sell. Okay? And we need that diversity, that richness of people who write the weird, exclusive stuff as well as the mainstream. Because if we only kind of praise successful authors, we end up with this kind of mainstream one voice, which is the good book, the good read book. We need those books. But also we need some fringe writers, because we all learn from each other. And I mean, I think of someone like TS Eliot's first book, with the Proof Rock collection. I think it sold something like I don't know, is it 120 copies or something like that? Tiny, So would he have been encouraged to abandon poetry? Because
and I think that's really important. Well, two things to say on that. One is to remind everyone that the Arts Council of England is doing a lot of grants to get people in and to get people working again. So do look at their grants, but also perspectives are really important to get it. And I have a concern that after this, publishers will be going to the big and will be forgetting that. And of course, I'm assuming you've written a lot about British Seeks, and you've presumably read the Spread the Word report on diversity in publishing. And I just have a concern that at this point, when we had some small green shoots going through, they might go back. But perhaps not. Perhaps people are beginning to see that we need perspectives. What's your feeling on that?
What's the last word you said? Sorry, people are seeing.
What's your feeling about whether we are moving to more diverse, particularly in terms of Black, minority, ethnic, Asian voices, or whether it is still very, very monoglot here? Yeah,
no, I definitely feel we're on this kind of a wave of newness in terms of BAME. Also, I think we must forget women. Women, until very recently in the poetry world, there were more women writing poetry than men, yet more men were getting published by the big presses. And we still have the issue in the poetry world where most of the big presses, whether it be magazines, but in particularly the poetry houses, are run by white heterosexual men. We haven't had that switch yet. So I'd like to see more women, one, and then more BAME authors generally as being editors of publishing houses. Because I think once that happens, we'll start seeing a regular shift. But I think we're definitely heading the right way. And that report written by Danuta Keane, which is started by Bernardine Evaristo, has a massive impact, and it has got people thinking, reflecting. I know when the Black Lives Matter really took off after the knee incident, Faber and Faber, my publisher, referred themselves to a black arts organisation to see how they could improve themselves, in terms of their publishing. But also one of the big issues in publishing is that there aren't many BAME people in the publishing world, whether it be marketing, sales, a whole lot. So that definitely needs to shift. That hasn't shifted at all. When you go into those places, publishing houses, when you go into the BBC, it is still largely white and still largely middle class. People from good educated backgrounds. So there are various shifts that still take place. But I've aside from being an optimist, I think we are definitely massively in the right direction at long last.
Good. Well, that might be because you talk so much about these different institutions. Maybe this is the moment for poetry reading from you, and then we'll finish with a couple of questions that people ask. Okay. And I think you're going to read from British Museum, and you're going to read "He Do the Foreign Voices."
Can I change it now?
I love a bit of spontaneity.
Because I haven't rehearsed this or anything, but I've got a poem which quotes Louise Gluck. So I don't know if you know, a couple of hours ago, she was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature.
I didn't see that.
Incredible. I think it's just last hour or two. I think she's the first American to win it, but since Toni Morrison. And, the first English language woman poet probably for a long time to win.
I think there's only been 15 up to now Nobel women winners in literature. And
I wonder if there's been a woman poet who's won it before then. I'll have to have a look.
Don't make me this.
I'm just really happy for her. She's a wonderful poet. So I've got a poem which refers to her, and it's just basically about. I don't know if you've seen this or people in the audience. I've seen more and more women walking down the middle of the road. Yes. So I find that really disturbing. I was talking to someone, and she said, if I'm walking home at night, I would never walk down the pavement in the evening because I don't trust it. So that's partly that got me going. So the title is a quote from a line by Louise Gluck. Even when we weren't touching, we were making love. Is from The Balcony by Louise Gluck. I feel I should say this to my wife. It's too dramatically American when our lives are afloat in a nervy comfort. Enough to know, yes, of course, she'd passed the Gluck test when we're side by side chopping greens or when she's away on a psychology conference. Upstairs from my window, I catch a woman walking down the middle of our road. I'm sure I see it more and more in Harrow. Are these Romanians and Asians scared an arm on the pavement might pull them in? Who'd report the loss? What happened before the crossing or here that leaves them exposed? In the early hours, foxes fall from the sky and pace along the dotted lines of our road to cry like multiple girls. Are these women the silent day version? Do they bawl so quiet their eyes have left the road that's turned ocean, turned into passage where a car cannot pass them but turn them up with their minds all the time on the one making love? Okay, so I'm just, partly thinking about those, I just worry about them. Sometimes see those women look and think, what if a car came really fast around the corner? And they look like they might be sort of from migrant backgrounds in particular, the ones I see. And I think, what trauma are they living through that they
So
won't.
many things in that poem. So many. It is so resonant of the experience, and of course, worse even with COVID, where people are also avoiding everyone else, and you're avoiding eye contact. And it worried me that for a while at the beginning, well, obviously even now, but the polite thing to do is to pass somebody and look the other way, which I just wonder doesn't isolate people who are very isolated even more.
Yeah, it's hard to know how to play that moment, and it takes a certain confidence. But even that confidence can come across wrong, can't it? It can have that belittling or patronising power, like you're in my space, you're in my world. You know, I have to put that majesty on. You know?
Although probably we're really overthinking, because I've also realised that now I'm wearing a mask, nobody can see that I'm smiling at them anyway. So sitting there, how am I approaching this person? And they're oblivious. We've probably only got about a few minutes left, so I'm going to just raise some of the questions we've been asked. The first one is, what are you currently working on?
Yeah, just a long poem, which is going to be book length. And I'm going to call it Indium, Indiom. So using Indian and mixing up idioms. Idioms are the kind of in language of a community. So trying to interrupt those idioms of Englishness with my Indian idioms, as it were.
Any idea when it'll be finished? When we
yeah, probably another year or so. Also, you know what it's like at the moment, Nicola, publishing, there's no readings, there's nothing going on. So I feel quite liberated. I think I should just write it and play with it for another year at least. Because, you know, you can't get out there and tour with it.
No, and you want to, and also I think at the moment one's very reflecting on this moment, but we probably all need some perspective before you can let it go.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then Catherine Black says, I love New Walk magazine and pamphlets, and they seem to be shining a light on really wonderful contemporary poets. And can you recommend any other magazines?
Well, I mean, I still read things like the sort of Poetry Wales, Poetry London, Poetry Review is still fantastic. And I get the LRB, and they usually have a poem or two in there. I quite like the weird ones they have in there every now and then. But I still really like Poetry Review. It's still a fantastic magazine. So I'll go to that one because they have quite an eclectic taste in there, I think.
And Grain Tobin said, how's being a teacher affected your writing and your idea of being and your idea of what a reader is?
Yeah, that's a really good, really interesting question, because I think one is you learn that kind of humility. You've got a day job, you get on with your job, and being a poet is one identity of your many identities, and every day you're reminded of that because you have a deeper responsibility to younger people to look after their well-being and inspire them. I think, yeah, absolutely. You learn how to work the audience, and you've got the immediate audience there with your students. So poetry is a conversation. Each poem is a conversation with the imagined reader. So you learn, I think teaching teaches you a lot to see from other people's points of view.
And you started with secondary teaching, but now you're university teaching. Is that a difference between those ages of students? I assume that now you're also teaching remotely, and I'm interested if that's a difference as well.
Yeah, I'm teaching remotely at the moment, but I'm still really keen at universities to teach first and second years in particular. I love those. And still, even third years, they still feel like school kids to me. They still feel like sixth formers. You know, they're really shy, nervous, they're making those basic mistakes, and they're trying out things. So I don't want to end up just teaching sort of post-grad and masters. I'm trying to keep down to the first year as much as possible. It's just that it brings out your parental instinct as well. And you're watching them, they are just little kids. They think they've left school and they're big kids. You know, the way primary school kids do to secondary, but they're just still little kids anyway. But yeah, it's a horrific time for those first, second, third years at university. They've got the worst deal ever. We're just teaching mostly online. And it's just rubbish for them. I mean, the digital poverty of some kids, in my class at the moment, some of the kids I'm teaching first year, don't have the screen on there, and they're on the phone. So they can't get access to Blackboard, to the server we use. They get it, but it's not great. So it's really hard for them to learn. And they've got Wi-Fi issues. We've got Wi-Fi issues. There's much worse. So it's a really hard time.
Yes, that's really helpful. Aviva Doubt told us that on our Nobel question, Nelly Sachs won it in the past but had to share it with Joseph Brodsky. So there's your answer on the Nobel question.
Yeah, he won it, didn't he? A long time ago now. 20 years.
Apparently they shared it. So there you are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And apparently he spent some of his money to buy Seamus Heaney a really expensive car as a gift. I don't know why.
Oh, like that. This has been so amazing and it's gone so quickly. So I really know that I ought to finish off, but I want to just have before I do the final winding up, just a last word from you. Is there anything you would say to people who are thinking of, well, who write poetry about what they would deal with it at this time, what their inspirations should be at this time?
Well, firstly, I think you should if you're at home, you've got this kind of space, this time, which we all seem to have. We're not going off on trains and whatever. Go back to the old poems and write them, rewrite the new ones. Keep everything alive. Don't assume it's finished. And that's my most important trick for me, I think, is keep it alive. Keep editing it. Change perspective if you can to keep it alive. I find that sometimes, even a year later, I'll make significant changes to a poem and it just suddenly feels better. But that's maybe because I'm more confident now, because it's such a temperament thing, isn't it? You know, after a half year, if you still haven't cracked it, you think, oh, it must be rubbish. But actually, all poets are like that. It takes them quite often over a year to get it, especially a more ambitious poem, to get it right. So keep playing. Play with your poems if you've got a lot of time.
I'm going to say thank you, but before I do, because I think we have to do this for your audience, is your puppy anywhere near so you can show?
See, yes. Anna, bring the puppy over. Yes, we have her. Sorry, my daughter's just come back from school and we've got the puppy. There he is. He's called, what's he called, Hannah?
Jago.
Sit down. Sit down.
Oh, look.
Can you move the screen down?
Yeah. But there he is.
So here's Jago puppy. You've done better than us because our puppy, we can't agree on a name at all. So she'll have a name for the next time I do an afternoon tea.
My daughter's picked the name. Apparently Jago is a Cornish name, meaning Jacob.
So sweet.
Good old English name.
So thank you so much. Thank you, Jago. Thank you for your daughter, Anna. Yeah. And thank you. It's been brilliant. Thank you to everyone who listened in. To remind everyone that all our afternoon sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Contingency Fund, that would be brilliant because, as Daljit said, there's really a lot of need. Also, we've put up a link to the Blackwell's link where you can buy Daljit's book or any of the books from anyone featured in the festival. And if you do, that will also give a 6% donation to the contingency fund. And so many things to continue thinking about. So, yeah, continue having fun, everyone. Continue writing and plenty to be thinking about. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone in the audience.
Thank you, Nicola, for being a brilliant host.
Thank you. Bye. And as I said, I'll show you my puppy next time. Bye.
Bye.